How could it end this way? How could it possibly end this way? I was numb. I was in shock. The days all seemed to be a blur. The week had started out so good. It seemed that everything Jesus had come to do was finally falling into place. You see, when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, everyone there, well, they couldn't but help and go tell everyone that they met. And people were finally coming to realize that Jesus was the Messiah. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. They couldn't explain away this miracle. They couldn't deny the power that Jesus commanded. And in Jerusalem, well, Jesus, as he was riding into the town on the donkey, people were treating him as a king. They were taking palm branches down from the trees and laying their cloaks on the ground as if to make a royal carpet for him. And you could hear the shouts of, "Hosanna, Hosanna to the Son of David." Those same people who were ready to crown him king, those same people were now shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" It was as if I was in a nightmare and I couldn't wake up. But seeing your son being led off to die is worse than any nightmare that you could ever imagine. If you are to know my story, I need to tell you so much about me. My life was different. My life was a little harder, I would say. Not at first. At first, I grew up in a Jewish family, and there was nothing extraordinary about that. And then I met Joseph. Oh, he was a wonderful man. Every girl dreams of growing up and meeting that one person to fall in love with and spend the rest of their life with. And for me, I got to realize that dream. He was so kind. He was quite a bit older than I was. But when he looked into my eyes, the love that we felt, I can't even put it into words. It was so good, so perfect. Our families were both thrilled, and we were getting excited to begin to plan our wedding day. And then an angel appeared to me, and I was scared to death. Now, don't get me wrong. Every Jewish girl dreamt of growing up to be the mother of the Messiah. I was thrilled, I was excited, I was honored. All the things that go along with that. But I was also scared to death. And as you may know, when I went to go and tell Joseph, he didn't believe me. I don't know what I thought was going to happen. I guess I thought he would just believe me and we would continue on together. But as I think about it, if the roles had been reversed, would I have believed him? He was more hurt than he was angry at me. And I had a hard time looking at him. For I knew he loved me, but I knew that he believed that I had betrayed that love. He tried to keep things quiet to avoid some of the ridicule. And then an angel appeared to Joseph, and everything changed. That next morning, Joseph came running to my house, and he got on his knees and he begged for my forgiveness. Oh, we were so excited. We talked all day long about what we thought might come, not knowing, but just imagining. We were thrilled, and we were going to do this together. Well, you know so much of my story from there. The trip to Bethlehem, the inn that was full, the stable, the shepherds, the wise men, and the such. You would think that Joseph and I would anticipate what was going to happen throughout Jesus' life by thinking about how the birth went around, but we had no idea. You know, I guess we thought that when the Messiah came, well, we had imagined it differently. We thought right away people would be joyous and happy, and people would recognize him and know exactly who he was, and they would begin to follow him. We thought about the happiness that it would bring, the victory. But it did seem that nothing ever quite went the way we thought it would. Well, Jesus, he grew up to be a fine young man. Oh, I think back to those days when he was little. Oh, those days were so much fun. He was so fun to be around. He was loving and kind. He was a little mischievous. He liked to help his father in the carpentry shop. Those were the days. Life was good. Life was simple. Life made sense. Now, I guess Jesus, even at a young age, had an uncommon understanding, though, of who he was. There was that time that we went to Jerusalem, and as we were headed back with the family in the caravan, we all of a sudden looked around and realized that Jesus was missing. Well, you can imagine the panic in both Joseph and I as we headed back to Jerusalem, hoping something hadn't happened to him. And do you imagine where he was? He was in the temple teaching the teachers. We didn't know whether to hug him or to punish him. And Jesus, well, he didn't understand why we didn't know where he would be. Joseph died as Jesus was growing up, and by then we had had other children. And Jesus took over the family carpentry place. And the other boys, they helped him as well. And when Jesus went off to start his public ministry, then the boys took over the family carpentry shop. I hated to think of the fact of going on by myself. But the children, they were good to me. And I knew I would never be completely alone. I didn't always go with Jesus, but boy, I'll never forget his first miracle. We were at a wedding, and they ran out of wine. Well, the host, he was a good friend of ours. And he was very embarrassed. And so I said to him, I'm going to go get Jesus. I don't know what I thought Jesus could do or would do, but I knew he'd think of something. Well, Jesus was rather stern with me, and he said that his time had not come yet. But I knew from the look in his eyes that everything was going to be all right. Well, 200 gallons of water turned into the best wine anyone had ever tasted. It was a good night. Jesus continued on in his ministry, and I didn't see him for a while. I heard about him, though. I heard about his teachings, and I heard about the disciples who he had called to follow him. I heard about the miracles he would be performing. I also heard, though, of people that criticized him. I heard about people that hated him. I heard about people who thought he was a threat. A threat? There wasn't a more kind and loving and gentle man on the face of this earth. But there also wasn't a more determined man. A man who knew exactly who he was and what he was there to do. And now, all around me, I would hear the shouts, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And as I looked up to where Pilate was standing, I saw my son, who was barely able to stand, for they had beaten him so badly. They had placed a crown of thorns on his head, and blood was running down his face. I tried to get to him as they led him through the city streets. I tried to push through the crowds. I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to see him. I wanted to hold him. I wanted him to know I was there. And the soldiers, they kept us back. So we followed. We followed to the hill of Golgotha. And there we watched. We watched as they took stakes and they pounded them into his hands and feet onto the cross. We watched as they raised that cross up and they dropped it in the hole. The women and I, we rushed to the foot of the cross and we knelt down, tears streaming from our eyes that we could hardly even see. And we wondered why. Why would they do this to him? What had he done to them? What had he done to deserve this? Any other man that would have been hanging from that cross would have been hurling insults down at the people, just like the thief on his right and his left. But not my Jesus. My Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." I wept and I wept and I wept until I thought no more tears could come out of my eyes. I remember John being there. He kept putting his arm around me, trying to comfort me. I remember Jesus at some point telling John that he was to take care of me. And then at noon, the sky became black as night. It was as if God himself had pulled a veil over the sun so that all creation could not see this travesty of injustice. The day wore on. And later on in the afternoon, it happened. Jesus looked up into the heavens and he said, "It is finished. Into thy hands I commend my spirit." And he bowed his head and died. I tried to raise to my feet, Raising my arms, I cried out, "No!" But it was too late. All of a sudden, the earth began to shake all around us as if it was morning itself. There was crevices appearing. Rocks were splitting in half. There was lightning and thunder like you had never seen before. And then it was quiet. A while later, they allowed us to take Jesus' body. They took it down from the cross, and we were allowed to take it to the tomb that Joseph of Arimathea had given us. And we laid Jesus in the tomb, knowing that we could not anoint the body that night, as it was against Passover regulations. So we knew that we would be back in 3 days to anoint the body. And so we left. Now, the only reason that I can tell you this story, the only reason that I can tell you what happened to my son that day without constantly weeping, is because I know this was not the end of the story. On Sunday, we came back to the tomb as we were going to anoint the body with oils, as was our custom. When we got to the tomb, the stone had been rolled away. The soldiers, they were gone. And there was somebody there asking us why we were looking for the living among the dead. He said to us, "Jesus is risen." Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Jesus is risen. It wasn't long after that I too would get to see him. I would get to talk to him. I would get to touch him. It was as if I had life brought back into my body. It was as if I had been risen from the dead. The next few weeks, they went by so quickly. Some would believe, others would not. But those who saw Jesus, there was no doubt about it. A mother knows her son.